Good morning. My name is Steve Mendoza. I'm a local activist. I'm also an organizer with the Poor People's Campaign. For those of you guys that are not familiar with the Poor People's Campaign, I will describe it, go into detail a little bit later, and we'll talk about why some of us see it as a unifying movement to bring about the better world that we all know is possible. So forgive me, I will be reading from my notes since this is kind of a longer speech than I'm used to giving. I'm going to start with a quote from Nelson Mandela. "Action without vision is only passing time. Vision without action is merely daydreaming. But vision with action can change the world." We're here today to begin to discuss how we can unite our movements behind a common vision so that we can engage in meaningful action to change the systems that are oppressing and exploiting our planet and the people. If we are to engage in a common struggle, then we should first identify the problem and then hopefully agree on the path forward. I'm going to begin my time speaking about our economic and political systems and how they perpetuate interrelated issues such as poverty, climate change, war, and so on. And I will also address some of the obstacles that we need to overcome. Specifically, I'll discuss why I think the source of the problem cannot be ignored, and why I think we must move towards a new system with this source in mind. Now, if you're not a capitalist, you'll agree with most of what I have to say up here. If you are a capitalist, hopefully I can change your mind. In this presentation, I'll be quoting several people that are much more intelligent than myself so that I can sound intelligent. That's why. I will then discuss a path forward to build power, to be able to fight not just local immediate issues, but also the source of the problems that we face as we begin to work towards a new system. So, I believe that we'll need to be able to unite the people in a mass movement to take on the current power structures, beginning at the local and statewide level. But I'll start by discussing a couple of the small obstacles we face in regards to system change. So the first small obstacle is that our economic system is the root cause of most of our societal problems today, and any small change to our economic system will be fiercely opposed by the powers that be. Even when an alternative exists that would be more cost-effective, there's significant opposition from the corporate forces. Today, for example, universal healthcare is more cost-effective than a for-profit healthcare system. But it's not being implemented because the healthcare industry pours money into our political system to fight against these changes. Another example can be seen in how the fossil fuel industry fights any move towards renewable energy. In other words, what we've seen is that the free market capitalist economy will oppose any reform that does not increase the profits for those currently in control. It's actually structured this way. We cannot incrementally reform capitalism to be an economic system that somehow allows us to make the reforms that prioritize the needs of poor and working people over the profits for a few. So if public health, sustainability, and maximizing human well-being are goals that are important to us, then we will ultimately need to replace the current immoral and illogical economic system. Unfortunately, there's no current power that exists in our society to make the changes that we all see the need for. The reason is because the root cause will continue to produce problems faster than we can fight the symptoms of the problem. This is why it must be replaced. Dr. Martin Luther King understood how the major evils, as he referred to them, were all interrelated. He said, "The evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and the evils of racism." If Dr. King would have existed today, with everything we know about climate change, I'm sure he would have added ecological devastation to the list of evils. Dr. King elaborates on the economic aspect when he said, "Capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad. If poor people do not participate in the free flow of wealth within our economy, they will forever be poor, giving their energies, their talents, and their limited funds to the consumer market, but reaping few benefits in return." The way to end poverty is to end the exploitation of the poor. So more than 50 years ago, Dr. King was able to connect the dots and see that our economic system is the root cause of most of our major problems. He understood that there would be no justice for the poor and working class under this system. Dr. Cornel West, in his book, The Radical King, writes, "The Radical King was a Democratic Socialist who sided with poor and working people in the class struggle taking place in capitalist societies," end quote. So we know that either directly or indirectly, capitalism is responsible for poverty and inequality, climate change and ecological devastation, systemic racism, and militarism. We have now seen clear evidence that this economic system is antithetical to sustainability. Capitalism requires continual growth and cyclical consumption. It does not strive for efficiency in regards to our use of resources, but instead strives to maximize profits regardless of the consequences. A real economic system cannot rely on infinite growth on a planet with finite resources. And we also know that our current system is producing hidden costs, which are never taken into account. These negative externalities, as they're called, are ultimately paid for by the people, and primarily poor people. These include pollution, unsafe drinking water, a decrease in public health, and structural violence in the form of premature deaths that could have been prevented. Coretta Scott King said, "Poverty can produce the most deadly kind of violence. I must remind you that starving a child is violence," end quote. If we actually put the costs of these negative externalities into the equation, this system would be exposed as the failure that it is, as if we needed more proof. A quote by Peter Joseph, one of the great thinkers of our time and the author of the new human rights movement, Reinventing the Economy to End Oppression, sums up the point concisely. It says, "Capitalism is structurally oblivious to humanity's existence on a finite planet. The system wants to produce, not conserve. In fact, if you think about it, you'll discover that there's an interesting paradox to market logic. The fact that capitalism is a scarcity-based economic system that actually seeks infinite consumption. The consequence is an economic system that is environmentally unsustainable, increasingly leading to ecological problems and consequential social problems. Any attempt to slow industrial behavior, hence slowing economic growth, will be met with dramatic pushback by almost all economic actors, regardless of their sincere interest in seeing conditions improve. Our current economic system is based on dominance, scarcity, and competition. We've seen that the levels of inequality that are inherent in this system, and yet it continues. And let me just say that these are not just national problems, but they are global problems. If we can find a way to change the direction of the US, then it's possible that other countries would follow, and we could change the world. The fact is that today we live in a post-scarcity society, where we have the technology to provide all basic necessities to all the people on Earth. In fact, if we had the technological capacity to provide everyone, we've had it for several decades now. Back in 1980, R. Buckminster Fuller, one of the great thinkers of the 20th century, stated that neither the great political and financial power structures of the world, nor the specialization-blinded professionals, nor the population in general realize that it is now highly feasible to take care of everybody on earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary. War is obsolete. Again, it's been about 40 years since this statement was made. Since 1980, we've had technological advances in our capability to provide more with less at levels that many are not even aware of. We can print homes, we can create vertical farms that minimize water waste, we can automate many previously needed occupations. But our current system would collapse if people could not earn the income they need to consume and continually grow this system. So our increasing technological capacity is exposing another deep flaw in capitalism, and if we don't change it soon, there will be a significant amount of suffering ahead, especially for the poor. Regarding our technological capabilities, Stephen Hawking in 2015 said, "If machines produce everything we need, the outcome will depend on how things are distributed. Everyone can enjoy a life of luxurious leisure if the machine-produced wealth is shared, or most people can end up miserably poor if the machine owners successfully lobby against wealth redistribution." So far, the trend seems to be toward the second option, with technology driving ever-increasing inequality. Now, let me just say that while our goal is complete system change, any move in that direction is a victory. Of course, we all understand that changing our economic system cannot be done simply because many of us may agree that it needs to be done. But while we're making improvements in the positive direction, I think it's important to state that moving beyond capitalism is ultimately our intention, and anything less will not be sufficient. When capitalism was failing back in the Great Depression, we saw FDR save capitalism through implementing the New Deal. While the New Deal did improve many people's lives, the natural tendencies of capitalism will always counteract these types of reforms, as we've seen. So we don't just want a New Deal that makes improvements on a cancerous system. If we only address the symptoms of the root cause, we'll find ourselves in a constant lifelong battle which results in little change. To quote Dr. King once again, capitalism does not permit an even flow of economic resources. With this system, a small privileged few are rich beyond conscience, and almost all others are doomed to be poor at some level. That's the way our system works, and since we know that the system will not change the rules, this is Dr. King, we are going to have to change the system. But again, the problem is that we do not currently have the power to make this vision happen. So our immediate goal, in my view, is to begin to build the power to bring about lasting change. So the problem we face is substantial, and because of that, many people feel helpless. Many choose to either disengage completely or only engage in smaller, more winnable battles, like saving a cat from a tree. But I do believe we can make large-scale systemic changes if we are united, and I think we must begin this process. Some would say that we have a moral imperative to do so. To quote Mandela one more time, "It always seems impossible until it's done." So now, the second small obstacle, and this will be much shorter, is the problem of our political system and the fact that we don't actually live in a democracy. If our elected officials were responsive to the needs of the people they supposedly represent, then we could all just call our representatives and ask them to, represent us. As we all know, that's not the way it works. Our elected officials are working for their corporate donors. They are not working for the rest of us. This is why 90% of both parties recently voted for a military budget of over $700 billion instead of using the money on programs that decrease poverty. Noam Chomsky said, in the US, there is basically one party, the business party. It has two factions called Democrats and Republicans, which are somewhat different, but carry out variations on the same policies. By and large, I am opposed to these policies, as is the majority of the population, most of the population. To add to this, a study that Princeton University conducted concluded that the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact on public policy. At the same time, public policy tends to go hand in hand with the will of the corporate donors of our two major parties. As a result, the study concluded that the U.S. no longer meets the definition of a democracy and has become an oligarchy. But I'm sure this isn't news to anyone here. Rather than democratizing our economy, our capitalist parties are united in the ideology that the free market is the best of all systems. But we know otherwise. We understand that capitalism will impoverish the world as capital seeks higher and higher returns, and as governments choose to disinvest in programs that benefit their people. We understand that infinite growth is antithetical to sustainability. We understand that the increasing levels of consumption demanded by capitalism will only increase economic imperialism and globalization. And we understand that the negative externalities of this immoral system will primarily affect the poorest people around the world. So what we're seeing now is a class war, and we, the people, are losing. But again, if we're going to change any of this, we cannot do so with a vision, simply with a vision. If we want to see the changes at the local level, at a state level, or at the national level, we'll need to be able to unite the people behind a common vision. So we must put in the work of building the power if we're going to have any hope of a political revolution in this country. To quote Dr. West one more time, don't be afraid to say revolution because we want a transfer of power from the oligarchs to ordinary citizens, beginning with the poor children of all colors and the orphans and the widows and the elderly and the working folk. And this political revolution will begin by building mass movements. To quote Chris Hedges, whom I got to see in Boulder recently, "It is capitalism, not government, that is the problem. The fusion of the corporate and state power means that government is broken. It is little more than a protection racket for Wall Street, and it is our job to wrest government back. This will only come through the building of mass movements." Now, if only there was an intersectional mass movement already underway. Anyone? The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. The Poor People's Campaign was started by Dr. Martin Luther King just over 50 years ago, not long before his death. The campaign was concerned with economic justice for the poor. In the past several months, it's been reignited and recently completed phase 1, which included direct actions across the country. The Poor People's Campaign is a nonpartisan, bottom-up movement that has a set of demands that we intend to have met. We will not have elected officials or candidates speak on our stage. Our main focus will be on impacted people, so we'll hear their stories and have them involved in our leadership. The main pillars of the Poor People's Campaign are poverty and inequality, systemic racism, ecological devastation, militarism in the war economy, and changing the moral narrative. These issues are bringing together religious folks with non-religious folks, environmentalists with peace activists, and everyone that's fighting for economic and racial justice. We're currently moving into phase 2 of the movement, which involves building power. Now, power means unity and organization in order to be able to make demands and have them met. We'll be inspiring communities to stay engaged for the long haul. In the near term, we'll be focused on uniting and organizing large segments of poor people across racial and geographic lines, as well as faith bodies and all organizations that are allies of the poor. We need to bring everyone into a fusion movement. This campaign will not just be focused on immediate issues that we face, but also on long-term systemic change. To quote one of the principles of the campaign, we've got some flyers outside, "We will build up the power of people and state-based movements to serve as a vehicle for a powerful moral movement in the country and to transform the political, economic, and moral structures of our society." To quote Reverend William Barber and Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, "This is not the time for an incremental campaign, but rather one that is willing to confront the rotten structures that perpetuate these injustices and is prepared to build new and unsettling alliances. We know that the issues of the day are bigger than the impoverished dichotomy of Republican versus Democrat or left versus right. The moral and spiritual health of this nation depends on our capacity to see deeper and more expansively. We are not aligned with a political party or a single election. There are no politicians that speak on our behalf," end quote. And finally, just a few of the demands of the Poor People's Campaign. We demand the immediate implementation of federal and state living wages that are commensurate for the 21st century economy, a guaranteed annual income, full employment, and the right for all workers to form and join unions. We demand 100% clean, renewable energy and a public jobs program to transition to a green economy that'll put millions of people in sustainable living wage jobs. We demand a ban on fracking, all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals. We demand reinvestment in and the expansion of public housing, ensuring that all have a decent house to live in. We demand that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share of this country's urgent needs around decent and affordable housing, free public education, a robust social safety net, and social security. We demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. And the list goes on and on. Please visit the poorpeoplescampaign.org for a full list of demands and principles. So in conclusion, I started with this quote: "Action without vision is only passing time. Vision without action is merely daydreaming. But vision with action can change the world." I believe that we all have the vision of what a better society could look like, but we don't yet have the power to achieve it. So the question isn't, do we need system change? Instead, the question should be, how do we build the power that's needed to bring about system change? We must first unite in a common struggle, not only expanding our reach with those that may already agree with us, but also forming some alliances with others that may not see eye to eye on everything, and understand that we need to change course. There's a lot more that unites us than divides us. In order to do this, we'll need to find a way to overcome any apathy or disillusionment of people that are currently inactive, and show them that change is possible. We don't need everybody on board, but we do need more than we currently have. Bringing everyone together will be a lot of work, but if we can do this, then lasting change is possible. The urgency to make these drastic changes cannot be understated. Which brings me to my ask of everyone here. I know that was intense. We need your help to unite the people behind a common vision and then mobilize them to action. So I'd like everyone here to join the Poor People's Campaign so that we can build the power that's needed to fight for our vision locally, statewide, and together with other states in a national mass movement. We'll be passing around small business cards that have a link to a pledge form. You can also take a picture of the tiny URL here and access the form later. We'll need everyone's help to make this successful. So please sign up, get involved if you can, and thank you for your time. All right.